This is TWiT.
You brought along... Now, I'm confused because it looks like... Well, what is that?
It's a container for a bottle of whiskey called Knappogue Castle.
Is there any whiskey left?
Well, yeah, there's a whole bottle of it right here.
Okay, good. Okay.
I just took the cork out of that. I just wanted to handle it carefully because it's full. But,
now, this looks like it comes from Midleton. Is it an Irish whiskey?
It is an Irish whiskey.
Okay.
Knappogue Castle is actually a castle, an old castle too. It's in Clare County, which is the southwestern part of Scotland. It's about 50 kilometers north of the Shannon Airport. That's 10 miles in the measures of the oppressors. The castle first built in 1467 by Sean McConamara, which is now we would shorten to McNamara. The name means the castle in the place abounding with little hills.
Aww.
And stays in the McNamara family right through until Oliver Cromwell invades Ireland, and it's confiscated and given to a Roundhead named Arthur Smith. But a few years later, when the monarchy is reestablished in Ireland, McNamara gets their castle back. They basically have it for 300 or so years. In the 1700s, they sell it to the Scott family, who then operate and maintain it as well. And in 1855, it goes to the Baron Dunboyne. Was actually one of the leadership sites where there were meetings for the War of Independence in the early 1900s. And finally, in 1927, it ends up in the Quinn family and becomes unoccupied for many years and in disrepair. And then it's bought by an American in 1966, a guy named Mark Edwin Andrews, who was the Assistant Secretary to the U.S. Navy. He's originally from Houston, but was doing some work, apparently fell in love with Ireland and been working with what was then the brand new airport in Shannon. They call this the Shannon Free Airport Development Company. And ultimately, they do a restoration on the castle. The family lives in it. And you got to think in the late 1960s, the Irish whiskey industry was in a terrible state. Like literally in 1966, there were only 2 distilleries still operating in Ireland. There was the Bushmills Distillery up in Northern Ireland, and there was Jameson, Cork Distillers, and that was about it. And that is when they sort of conglomerated, worked together to build the new Midleton Distillery in the 70s, and bought up a lot of the brands that were bankrupt, the Redbreast and the like. So in that time, Mark Edwin Andrews was buying barrels of whiskey from effectively broke distilleries. And very famously, he bought a few good barrels from the old Tullamore Distillery in barrels that had been laid up in 1951 and were just sitting there. And he bottled it in 87. So it had been in sherry casks for 36 years. And it's called Knappogue Castle 1951. You can still find one of these bottles once in a while in auction. The last one sold for $2,500 US. And apparently there is a 1949 edition, also Tullamore Dew, 33 years in sherry. That's even rarer to find. And I couldn't find any pricing on that whatsoever. So that entity, the Shannon Free Airport Development Company, becomes just Shannon Development, and they have this group they call the Shannon Heritage Group, and they've restored the castle, and they operate it for medieval banquets and events and so forth. It becomes a famous place to stay. Charles de Gaulle stayed there. Richard Nixon stayed there. And ultimately in the 90s and 96, Shannon Development buys the castle outright from the family. But in the meantime, so that brings us to this edition of the whiskey, which is the son, Mark Edwin Andrews III, launches a company called Great Spirit, LLC. And he actually takes the remaining bottles of Knappogue Castle 1951 and makes it available to the public, and then starts to collaborating with the Midleton distilleries to make their own whiskeys. So these are still, again, Tullamore Dew, all these whiskeys come from the Midleton Distillery. The Midleton Distillery was built in the 70s specifically to have one set of stills and equipment that could make multiple kinds of whiskey. And so it's not hard to calibrate to make your own versions. And so the original Knappogue Castle from this new generation was a 12 that came out in 2010. And then they came out with this 16 as well. And I should wrap this up with in 2021, Irish Distillers acquires them. That's actually owned wholly by Pernod Ricard. So they're now part of the big conglomerates. So yeah, New Midleton, the Midleton Distillery is Jameson, Redbreast, Red Spot, Green Spot, Blue Spot, Yellow Spot, Tullamore Dew. The whiskey itself is strictly malted barley. We know that's not a requirement for Irish whiskey. They do all kinds of crazy things with it. It does a triple distillation instead of a double. That's the way they like it. So they raise the alcohol level a bit higher, and then they age. And the 12-year-old is aged strictly in bourbon. The 14-year-old is bourbon and sherry. And this 16 is 14 years in used bourbon casks, and then 21 months in Oloroso sherry. So my first taste. The big, strong alcohol note up front, which is always a surprise. Like, don't expect it to be, but not too sweet. Very gentle in the mouth, though. Boy, oh boy, that's too easy to drink. But for a 16-year-old, you would expect as much. This is a very drinkable first whiskey. Sort of warms you up. You don't want to, it's $100 US if you can find it. About $43, 43% ABV, so it goes down real nice. But yeah, that's a fruity, happy. This is Irish whiskey, and it's March, right? Like St. Patty's Day is upon us, so let's drink Irish for a while here.
Yeah,
and this is a nice one to have around. I'd have a nice, 3 fingers of this off the bat, and then you can switch to Jameson and not feel bad about it.
So this is, if I'm understanding you, better than Jameson.
This is a first drink whiskey. This is a very nice. This is your $100 bottle of whiskey, pure. Mostly aged in bourbon and sherry. So you have this off the bat. Have a nice toast, right? Toast Skype. Thanks for all the calls, and then we switch.
Pour one out for poor old Skype.
Then you drink the $20 bottle, not the $100 bottle.
Good. I need more bottles to buy for my brother-in-law, who's an Irish whiskey fan.
Yeah, and Knappogue Castle is a great name. It's just that those guys, they don't own a distillery, right? They just make their stuff in New Midleton. But it's the same as Ryder's Tears and a whole lot of other whiskey makers.
Sure.
Or whiskey brands just use the Midleton Distillery. It used to be called the New Midleton Distillery 50 years ago, but now it's just the Midleton Distillery.
It's not new anymore. It's been
like
Tony Hawk.
It's 58.
No longer new.
How good can you be at 58? My goodness, right?
This sounds really good. I love Irish whiskey because it's not. It's
and
never
that's the thing.
peaty
It's
or smoky. It's always a little sweet.
Yeah,
it's good.
But they can get too sweet. Like they can get a little weird, right? This is very much a classic barley whiskey.
Nice.
Made a classic way with a triple distillation, so it's a little smoother and a little less oily and stuff. It's light, and you can't go wrong. And so great to show up with as a gift. You like someone enough to spend $100 on them. Here's
exactly. That's why. And you can get it in the US pretty easily.
You can. I found it at Total Wine.
Yeah.